Hi, and all I can say is wow. I released part one of this Lysefjord cold wax medium and oil painting demo. Well, just the way that I do it really, not necessarily a demo, but I released that, and a very unexpected positive reaction. I'm very pleased with it. I'm really made up, and you know, as I talk to you now, there are 500 odd views, and to me that's going viral compared to the other little things I've just tried to release and have a play about with. So I'm really grateful, and it's given me a little buzz to crack on and show the second part of the Lysefjord cold wax medium thing, the painting demo. Some people have messaged me, lots of people have subscribed to the YouTube channel, so I'm going to have to do this more and more to keep those guys happy. Some people have subscribed to my blog on the website, brilliant as well, I'm loving it. I've been asked a question about the surface that I paint on, and yeah, really good question, because I didn't talk too much about it. As I mentioned, I use these cradle panels, okay, and they're brilliant, but they're obviously really bright primed gesso white colour. And so what I tend to do with these is basically just get hold of a couple of different acrylic paints, and they're mainly dark earth type colours, and I just basically, there's no science to it, I just splat them on in various parts of the surface and spread them around a little bit, avoiding getting them all mingled up fully so it's just one big dark muddy colour. That's to be avoided. I want the uniqueness of each individual colour on there. I don't go too colourful, I'll just use maybe, you know, 3 different colours, and move them around with that big flat haki Japanese brush that I have. But you can also use these silicone tools that cold wax medium painters love so much, or palette knives even, and you know, spray a bit of water on them just to get them moving around if that helps too. So yeah, that's the surface explained, hopefully anyway. And the other question was, why use cold wax medium when you can just splat regular paint on? Well, the problem with just splatting regular paint on is its consistency, even if it's really good quality paint, which would cost you an arm and a leg really, especially if you're using your cobalts and cadmium colours. So I mix the cold wax medium in for my flatter, should we say, washes, just to make the paint go a bit further, but it's still textured. It's not smooth like plaster. It's still got some kind of texture to it, but I just don't want great big peaks in a sky. That tends to make it not look like a sky. I still have texture to some degree in it in other paintings. It's just this particular one that I was working on, I wanted them flat. And in part one, when I did the sea, well, I can't say I've got a definite plan to keep it flat, but the cold wax paint gives it that bit more opacity if I do want to. It's I don't really see the green leering through, and I could look for I could scrape away bits of it, and that's great, because the other thing about the cold wax is it gives the paint a little bit of substance and a little bit of strength to stay together and not self-level when you make marks in it with tools like skewers and cutlery and catalyst and silicone tools, that kind of thing. So it keeps itself together, and that's another reason I like it. When I carry on with Lysefjord in the middle, I'm going to get into using palette knives and things like that, and the property of cold wax medium that I'm going to exploit the most really there will be the way it helps me create an impasto painting. However, if I was doing a painting like other ones I've done where the foreground isn't sea and it's foliage, wow, cold wax medium is your boy for that, because you know, you can just stick the usual tools. Don't mean that disrespectfully, but the usual tools that you have in the abstract world with cold wax medium. You know, the scrunched up tissue paper that you put a roller over and then peel it off, and you see that nice speckled kind of finish. I love that, and it's brilliant in a landscape. You know, if it's foliage, greenery, field, rocks. Wow, you know, it really helps you suggest those things. The thickness of the cold wax medium as well allows me to do things like drop dry pigment into it, you know, or scratch away and reveal my acrylic underpainting. You know, you can do so much to it. You can carve it, you can shape it, you can push it around, pull it around, scrape it back, make marks in it, add metal fragments and dry pigment. It's great. So I'm just adding the last of my colours to the palette. This is Indian yellow. Don't always use it, but it's great with cold wax medium. There goes the cold wax medium at the top. I'm just mixing up some colours now that are similar values for the rocks. At this point I'm just trying them, and I might need to make adjustments, but these are mid values to the outside of the very dark part between the two main structures of these cliffs, and I'm quite happy with it so far. Adding a few little extra darks. These were underpainted in Payne's Grey in part 1, but I'm looking at giving them a little bit more texture and showing very small lines of black as cracks going up into the mid-tone that I just put on. Now I've made a little tone that's kind of halfway, so it's not going to be a highlight colour, but it's a sort of mid-tone value, and this is an area of the right hand side of the rocks that catches the light, so I'm trying to just show that, just knifing it on really with an angled flat and giving some balance over to the left side now. The far left is predominantly a dark colour, so I'm just putting a few little hints in. I've been using a green called Terre Verte, which I really like, but it kind of gets washed out easy, so I had to back it up with a bit of Viridian there. Can be a little bit artificial looking Viridian, so you have to mix it right. Here at the cliff top edge, I'm experimenting with a very sort of yellowish green as a highlight. Not too convinced it works, so I'm just leaving it really to see if it starts to pop out properly. And here comes my dog. I'll have a little dance with your dog now and again. So right now I'm using a skewer to make some marks and a palette knife. For the same reasons really, I'm cutting into the thick textured paint and cold wax, revealing little lines where the original greeny burnt sienna acrylic lies, and some of that black or Payne's Grey that I put in at the end of part 1. I've got a sort of mid-tone value as well that I'm moving around and applying it. I'm cutting some horizontal lines there into the rock surface. Adding a few dark verticals. And I'm trying to sort of demonstrate that there is this darkness surrounding the top of the boulders just on the shoreline. I'm using quite a dark colour here to give me a line separating the land features with the sea. Not entirely sure if this is working at this point. It's very, very dark and it might appear unnatural, but I'm going to leave it there and move on to more rock coverage. I'm using the flat of the blade to press paint down and drag it. And what this does for me anyway is if you have a little bit of texture on the board, peaks from the acrylic maybe, I say peaks but just little kind of ridges, if you drag the paint loaded knife sort of gently across the top of it, bits of paint catch and bits of the original surface are left, and that's quite nice. It gives a great textured look. And I'm just dragging that down to the big rock right in the foreground there. I don't want it to look too sloped, so I'm just trying to add some vertical lines at this point and break up real definite separating lines that just make it look like a bunch of rectangles. Trying to develop these rocks in the mid-center. There's a lot more yellowish green there, saturated, or brighter I should say, just to show that that part of the landscape is closest to us. And again, I'm back in with this Payne's grey mixture to show that separation. It's quite tempting to nick blobs of really thick paint and just put it somewhere else, which is fine. I don't think I can stop myself doing that, and I should, because I really like big thick blobs when they're left and a painting's dried. I like looking at them. Again, I'm just trying to achieve this rock texture by dragging or flicking paint around. Close-up would be good, and I have got a close-up coming. Standing back is the important thing. And sometimes, you know, I work with the painting on an easel vertically. I definitely feel this after a couple of hours painting when I've been standing up and bent over the table. But yeah, it's good to have a little break and walk away. I was going to delete this bit where I'm getting new paint out. I think it's important to say that if you try and make do with the stuff that you've got on your palette rather than squeeze paint out, you're tired. And I think you need to maybe get yourself a cup of tea and put your little feet up and, you know, have a break from it and come back to it a lot fresher. So I've just had a nice little cup of tea, and I'm having another crack at getting this vegetation right. Because the picture that I'm using is black and white, this is just artistic license really, but it's nice, I think, to get in a very monotone limited palette painting like this. I think it's nice to have a little flash of colour. So I'm just seeing what works at this point in time. Still, I wouldn't say entirely convinced that the green's working. I'm back on the very dark mix again. Like I mentioned earlier, we need this dark to make the lights pop, if you get what I mean there. So I'm just carving around the foreground rocks to show their edge. Again, standing back, having a little look at it, seeing if it works. If it doesn't work, it's fabulous. You can just scrape it off if it doesn't. Moving some paint up now to give vertical cracks and starting to show the really dark part on the far left of the cliffside. Still cracking paint into the shoreline to see if that's going to work out and give me this nice gap between the sea and the rocks. Working some mid-tones into that little, I think it's really mainly vegetation there, but I'm showing a bit more rock than is really there. But because I'm using a mid-tone value that would be the vegetation colour or value, it sort of works okay. I'm tempted to leave it. Still working paint down vertically. What I've done here is I've mixed up what's probably going to be the highlight or the brightest bright. It's not a full white, obviously, and that would just really look too artificial. It's a lightened down rock mix, so there's Payne's grey in there. There's a bit of ultramarine, there's a bit of burnt umber in there, but it's mainly white. And I'm dropping that in, and I'm just showing where the light catches these vertical or sloping sides of the rock. It's very tempting to go over the top with this. Once you've laid a bright colour in, it can kind of milk out the darks, so tread carefully with this. If you do it right, you can get really good effects. Now this is this little tool that everybody seems to be a big fan of, cheapest chips from a DIY shop. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of scraping paint away. Remember to clean it because you'll just move paint around and get mud. So every now and again, just take off what you've lifted. But it's lovely to cut little lines in, and this will reveal suggestions of that original green acrylic that I had, or you know, the blocking in colour that you use. Carving in my darks again just to show the shape of the rocks. I want to separate that big piece of the shoreline from the other rocks at the shore behind it. So I'm just kind of over accentuating the rocks and very dark little clumps of foliage that you can see. Again, I'm not 100% sure that works. I'm going to leave it and have a look at it again later. Back to this foliage again, just spreading some green around. At some point I've added a Vasari colour to the palette called Cedar. Not the cheapest colour because there's a lot of cadmium in it, but beautiful when you use it. Managed to drop a big splat of it onto the sea, which I'll scrape up in a second. Oh, it's gone. Adding mid-tone values to the left side of the painting now, and I can start to see some shape in that. It's quite satisfying at this point to see that develop. And I'm just using a really flat-edged, like a sort of chisel-tipped palette knife there, rather than the long, flat ones that I've been using to carve out. That almost painted itself there in a really pleasing way, and sometimes you can get that. I'm sticking the same sort of value in to just kind of balance it out in other parts of the painting, in these little foreground rocks. Using the same knife, which I've cleaned off a little bit, I'm now just starting to draw in vertical lines with the palette knife, in the same way that I was using the little tool. Again, keep it clean because you'll just spread colour around and you'll get mud, which isn't really desirable. It's actually lots of fun doing this. I'm pushing tiny little bits. I'm almost kind of putting paint on the tip and very, very lightly dragging it across so that it catches higher areas of paint with the white highlight colour. Back into the vegetation again. I think this kind of nagged away at me during the whole process. I don't know if I got the greens right particularly, but they sort of grew on me, if you forgive the pun. I'm hesitating. This section is really dark on the drawing, or sorry, the printout. So I'm sticking my mix of, this is Payne's grey with a lot of burnt umber in it. And I'm just laying it down to this gully. And bringing it down to the shoreline a little bit, and then carving this silhouette shape in at the top. It's really, again, it's just really pleasing. I'm suggesting the rock lines now with the side of the palette knife. I've changed from that little angled chisel one that I was using before, and this is a more sort of traditional palette shaped knife, like a sort of spade shaped one. And now what I've got is the flat of the palette knife, and I'm just sort of like splatting it into it and then pulling the paint around. It's painting itself, really. Same palette knife, nice and clean, and I'm just giving texture by physically cutting down the shapes with the edge of the knife. Being a bit naughty, I should clean the blade a bit more than this because I'm just moving paint around, so there's a real risk of getting it muddy. So far so good though, it seems to be working. Stand back, have a look. I'm quite happy. There are horizontal lines as well as vertical, and the eye likes to have a little bit of that variety. So if it was all vertical lines, it would kind of just bore the eye a tiny bit, in my opinion, obviously. So I'm mixing some vertical lines with the horizontal lines just to give that kind of variety, and pulling some white vertical lines down. back in with that highlight colour. Okay, and just being really careful not to go overboard with this and kick the pants out of it, because it will just ruin the too many highlights will ruin the effect. Okay, just a few last minute little fiddles. I'm starting to get to the point now where I think change. So I've got more of a close-up arranged here, and I'm not speeding this little section up. It's kind of useful to see it, I suppose. All I've got here is a simple skewer to make kebabs with, that kind of thing, and I'm making marks in the paint with that. When I use that, I can scratch right down to the original sort of green colour that I used in acrylic. Again, it's a really pleasing part of the process. Unfortunately, though, you can't see what I do to the left-hand side because of the way that I had the camera set up. And I'm using a variety of tools here just to carve in a little bit of variation where the rocks hit the sea or the fjord. I'm also putting in some sort of beach type colours and mixed a yellow ochre sort of mixing white and just knifing it in. But I've used a skewer, I've used my finger, I've used a palette knife to take away these little horizontal lines that I'm just dragging across. And I do more of that across the full length, but I don't do it very far down, so we still have that nice flat blue colour. And there you can see the whole thing now in a slightly better view. And just scratching out my name.